For now, we're going to continue with a panel discussion on different topics, partly on what Professor Keen has told us, but also on the question how to move forward regarding our curricula. First, I would like to introduce the panelists to you. We have, moving from right to left, from your view, we have Dirk Damsma, who is teaching at the UvA. Dr. Damsma has taught economics and business methodology at both the University of Amsterdam and Nijrode Business University for almost 15 years now. This experience has opened his eyes to the very insular nature of modern economics and led him to pursue a research agenda aimed at building bridges between disparate approaches and scientific fields. His dissertation, for instance, has bridged the gap between quantitative and qualitative research techniques. Welcome, Dr. Damsma. And then we have our stand-in panelist. Again, very grateful that you would do this at the last minute. Dr. Lukkezen, Jasper Lukkezen, is an all-round macroeconomist who focuses on communicating economics. He has written his PhD thesis at Utrecht University on sovereign risk and has a broad experience as a policy advisor on fiscal policy and macroeconomic stability. And currently, Dr. Lukkezen is managing the Dutch Journal on Policy Economics, ASB, which is also organizing this entire week, by the way. Finally, we have Professor Erik Stam, who is a full professor at the Utrecht University School of Economics. He is an undisciplined economist, collaborating with many academics and practitioners outside the economic discipline to better understand the context and consequences of entrepreneurship and the economy at large. He has held positions at the Erasmus University Rotterdam, University of Cambridge, the Max Planck Institute of Economics in Germany, and the Netherlands Scientific Council for Government Policy, the VRR. And we will hear a lot more from these panelists. Of course, we also have Professor Keen, but you know him already. But first, I would like to ask a question to you, the audience. And it's this. Actually, let me introduce it first. The thing is, you can teach very different things when you're teaching economics. Some people say that economists are primarily people with a good set of, let's say, methods and research techniques, very good at quantitative social science, focusing on the concept of human behavior under scarcity. Others say, and you can apply this to any field, social scientific, inside or outside the economic system. Others say that economists should focus on the economic system as a field of research and investigate that by whatever means necessary, not restricting themselves to this particular toolkit. So that includes other theoretical framework, other research methods like qualitative research, and the same two possible approaches hold for an education in economics. There's a lively debate about this, so I want to ask you, we have these two options. Read through them. Who would say option A, economics education should be about the economic system? We have a few careful hands going up. 7, 8. Who would say option B? Economics education should be about the theoretical instrumentarium of human behavior under scarcity applied to any social scientific topics. Option B. Again. Oh. And who has not voted at all? Thank you very much. Okay. Well, let's ask the panelists. I would like to ask a first reaction from Dr. Lukkezen.
Yeah, so I think the both statements come from an article by Erik van Damme in this book. This was already mentioned. And this statement is closer to the rethink position as far as Erik van Damme understands your position. So it basically says you look at the economic system with whatever methods you have available, whether they're qualitative, whether they're from an heterodox perspective, whether it's rational expectations. You can use whatever you want, but you have to look at the, the object is the economic system. Now, I personally think there's great merit in here. So I'm kind of in the middle, but because the other position is also very valuable. The problem we have at this point is that economics education mostly takes the second position, right? So probably it's on the next slide, the next statement. So mostly economics education is taking a neoclassical point of view, whatever that may be, and apply it in all domains of human life. And I think neither of these two positions should be all-encompassing and determining what economics is. Economics, in my view, should be both, because if you have a diversity of views, you tend to have better outcomes for society.
All right, thank you very much. Any other reactions? Actually, let's make this a free discussion. I don't want to moderate too much.
So we're all waiting for each other. Okay. The first thing I'm thinking is that I agree to option A. Option B, and I think that's what you're saying, what you're basically implying. Option B can be very, very useful in cases where there is scarcity. But to assume that scarcity is the basis of our economic system is basically to ignore the abundance of labor that we've had. We've had unemployment for a very long time. So there is labor abundance, capital lies idle, a lot of capital lies idle most of the time. So to talk about scarcity is basically not talking about economics at all, which explains the economic imperialism in all the other fields where there might still be some scarcity. So let's talk about stuff that doesn't have to do with the economic system, because scarcity in the economic system is a bit hard to say is a founding basic principle. So I'd say it should be about the economic system, and sometimes, very sometimes, some pockets of the economic system there may still be scarcity, but it's not a guiding principle anymore, not in Western advanced societies.
The funny thing is that definition arose in 1936 from Lionel Robbins. So right in the middle of the Great Depression, that was put forward as the depression explanation of the economy, scarcity. And it was picked up, and Robbins was actually more inclined to being Austrian than neoclassical, but it was adopted very rapidly by the neoclassical school as the defining principle of economics. But a beautiful piece of work by, who's heard of the name János Kornai? Okay, you better have a read, because he wrote a brilliant book. He was actually a Hungarian economist trying to analyse why socialism grew so slowly compared to capitalism. His explanation was that socialism is a scarcity restrained economy, whereas capitalism is demand constrained. Completely inverts the understanding here, and said that a socialist system, if you leave Stalin out of the picture, just imagine a pure, well-implemented socialist system where you wanted to get the working class wages to be as high as possible, you're trying to develop from an underdeveloped state, so you've got every investment project is worthwhile. What that finally means is all the resources are rationed. Everything is rationed, so the easiest way to handle when things are rationed is to produce last year's model next year, reduce the cost and waste of innovation and so on. What you get out of it is very slow growth with just increasing very slow technological change. But you'll grow until such time as you reach your capacity constraints, then you'll grow at capacity as a population and capital expands, but very, very slowly. We're a demand-constrained economy. You've got lots of firms all competing for the same market. They produce tons of excess capacity. That's why there's always spare capital around, because Apple's sitting there hoping Samsung will stuff up, which it did, okay? If you don't have the spare capacity, you can't sell the iPhones if you can't produce them. There's always spare capacity, even during a booming economy. You try to keep wages as low as possible. You have crises of effective demand all the time, but the main way you manage to get extra resources for your company is you innovate. So that kind of tends to be innovative and have spurts of growth. And that was Kornai's explanation for why capitalism grew faster than socialism. That completely inverts the argument about scarcity. And in fact, Kornai said, neoclassical theory is a really good analysis of socialism.
Well, that is that is one of the things that if you read the Breumantel and Sonnenschein conditions very, very seriously, then what you end up with is a maximum unfree society. You're not free to choose because there's only one good. You're not free to be different from anyone else because, well, all preferences need to be identical. So you're free to choose as long as you're exactly the same as everyone else and you have nothing to choose. So that underlines your argument that neoclassicism is a really good analysis of socialism, but not even of existing socialism, but of socialism as the worst dictator could dream it to become one day. But you got to be a terrible tyrant to believe in that kind of socialism and analyze it by neoclassical means.
I'm curious about Professor Stam. We've not heard you at all. What do you think about this?
Yeah, well, this definition, so B is a definition from indeed Lionel Robbins' 1936, which is a state of the economy which is pretty different than 2016. So the economy was dominated much more by agriculture and by manufacturing and much more by, let's say, material scarcity, while these days it's much more about how to recombine knowledge in new ways and how to develop the new iPhone, in which, of course, material scarcity is still an issue, but let's say how to develop new knowledge and how to make new combinations has become a much more important driver of the economy. So, first of all, I think the economy is rather different than it was in 1936. Second, I think also psychologists might have done a better job in explaining this than a pure economist, especially if you take the recent behavioral economics revolution seriously, in which we have much more influx from knowledge on psychology. I think, well, you can say this for pure monodisciplinary economics, this is not really a good selling point. So I'm much more in favor of A, and that's also because of my own practical experience. So if you collaborate with others, with psychologists, sociologists, philosophers, political scientists, I think ultimately the added value of economists is to say something about the economic system, about how micro relates to the macro and how systems are dynamic and how we can enable and stimulate economic dynamism and what are the barriers for that. So that's also, I think, our added value in the real world, so to say.
Thank you very much. It seems that the panelists largely agree on this issue, but perhaps we have some questions from the audience about position A, position B, or something related. Do we have any questions for any of the panelists at this point?
Hi, my name is Albert Jan. I'm a PhD student in economics. So I was wondering, so you were talking, I forgot the name, but the discussant on the far right. So you were saying that the fact that there's unemployment means that scarcity is not an issue, but you could say that this is a scarcity of jobs, right? So is it really valid to think of this as being non-scarcity, basically?
Well, there is a scarcity of jobs because of the demand constraint that Keen just mentioned. But to think of the economic system as fundamentally constrained and of all analyses starting from the idea of scarcity is strange when production. When the means of production are themselves actually not scarce. So there could be a scarcity of jobs, but then we could just create more goods and there wouldn't be a scarcity of goods. So it doesn't really solve the problem. There is not a scarcity of ability to produce goods. People want to work, or unless you believe in voluntary unemployment, but usually people want to work. All the unemployed that I know would like to work. So so they would like to work. They would like to have more production because, well, our desires are supposed to be endless. So there is a logical flaw in there.
Perhaps I can follow up on this. I think the scarcity of jobs is really a big societal problem, and I think that's a subject to study as economists, so that we can explain how this scarcity of jobs arises and what you can do with changing institutions, how you can make use of technology, how you can allocate tasks of different people in different countries, So in that sense, it's a very important topic to study as an economist, but it's not, let's say, so inherent in the definition of economics.
My point exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, so can I ask you a question?
Me, yes?
Yeah. So why did you put the word theoretical in B?
That's an interesting question. I guess it's because of the results we gained from our course review presented by Francis and Maarten, which was that what we get right now is theory and not a lot of real world, so to speak. So I guess B could be said to be a reflection of the current curriculum.
But are you arguing you want different theory, or are you arguing you don't want theory?
It's interesting. I was up here to moderate the panel, but
Okay, but you also issue a report, so I'm
yes.
trying to understand what,
Yes,
what
of course.
it is you're advocating.
You can throw it back to the audience. So.
Yeah. Anyone? Well, I'm happy to answer this one actually. We would like theory. We would like a diversity of theory, but we would not like not only theory, which is what we're getting right now. And we would like not only one theory. So what we at Rethinking Economics would like is a diversity of economic paradigms, of economic theoretical schools, and a diversity of methods as well.
I think it should be clear what the end goal of the theory is, and the end goal should be to understand reality. So if you start out with the real world, start theorizing from data, then disparate approaches, the different schools can help different questions about those data. But what happens very often in economics education now is that you are, well, bamboozled into thinking that one day this will become, you will see how it can be applied. But after 5 years of studying, you're hoping, well, when is the real world coming into my classroom? And it's not happening. So if at least you're honest, if you start out by saying, for instance, I think a very good course, a step towards a good education is Koen van Mijnen's course in the University of Amsterdam. Is a basic course in macroeconomics, a first-year course, taught together with this mathematics course, and is also a required course. And he teaches, well, mainstream, neoclassical, old macroeconomics, not modern macroeconomics. But half of the course is dedicated to real-life graphs and stats. 3 countries, Japan, US, and the Netherlands, and then all the important facts and figures that we talk about from the 1950s till now. And then students immediately see, well, if half of this fits the theory, it's a lot. So they come out of this course with a lot of open questions. And that is the curiosity that we hope they take into other courses. And it's from there, you can take it from there. So it's a combination of theory and practice, but show the real world, to be honest, as Mr. Keane also said, to be honest about what you're teaching and what you're not teaching, what is relevant and what is not. And if you're doing that, then you're still doing theory, but you're allowing students critical thinking. You're allowing them to ask questions that require a different heterodox approach to find an answer.
Thank you. When is the real world coming into our classroom? I think that's an interesting note to move on to the next question. And our next question is, as students at Rethinking Economics, we are mainly students, and some professors as well, but mainly students. And as students, we talk about education, which is one half of what happens at universities. We don't talk much about research, which is the other half of what happens. Well, there seems to be a third half called bureaucracy, but we don't talk about that at all. But the researchers are the same people as the educators. And since the world of the researchers is to a large degree determined by publications, we thought, how big of a role does this publication culture play in the type of education we get? I would like to again first ask the crowd. Here is a statement. The main barrier to a more pluralist and real-world economics curriculum is the dominance of the publish or perish academic culture. The options are simple. So think about it. Don't think about it too long. Who would say option A? Yes, this is the main barrier standing between us and a more pluralist, diverse curriculum. About 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Okay. And who would say option B? No, other factors are more important. About the same. And who has again found this statement too complex for 5 seconds of decision? Okay, thank you. Well, let's ask our panel. I would like to ask Professor Stam for the first reaction on this one. We've put the statement, the main barrier is, as a discussion statement.
Yeah, even though I don't think the publish or perish culture is a healthy state of the academy in general and of economics in particular, I don't think this is the major barrier to pluralist thinking, because there's a lot of, especially these days, there's so many journals, so many good journals, and also, let's say, journals like PNAS or PLOS, which are, let's say, post-disciplinary, which are very highly regarded also within the economics discipline, and which you can find a very good home for your good academic work. So I disagree.
Any responses?
Yeah. Well, yes. I'd say yes to the statements, but with some caveats. Publish or perish in itself does not need to be very detrimental to academic freedom. It can be. But at the moment, publish or perish is often based on, well, in the University of Amsterdam, Rotterdam as well, Leiden as well, on the Tinbergen list. So you basically, you are not only assessed by the amount that you publish, but you also need to publish in, well, high impact factor journals. And the high impact factor journals tend to be those journals that whose gatekeepers are Ptolemaians, to stay with that metaphor. So publish or perish, possible, but you got to be careful to have a real broad spectrum of journals that you can publish in. And if you take impact factors, for instance, from my field, economic methodology, that journal has decided they don't want an impact factor. It is an important journal, but publishing in it is just career suicide at the moment at the University of Amsterdam. So that puts me in a bit of a hot spot. So yeah, and in that sense, it is a barrier to more pluralist real-world economics, because as a result, I couldn't have a real career, so I'll not really develop pluralist approaches, and then I'll probably be replaced by someone that publishes more in the right journals. So with some caveats, if you get rid of the Tinbergen list, it's the short of it, then publish or perish is okay.
Yes, Dr. Lukkezen, and I would like to remind you, we are talking about the curriculum, about the teaching here. Of course, I asked a question about research, but mainly with respect to its effect on what students learn.
Yeah, well, but that's an automatic result. If well, researchers usually like researching better than teaching. That is a fact most of the time. So if you want good people to teach pluralist courses, you need to give them research time. And if whether you get an allowance for research time depends on whether you will publish in American Economic Review and other of the neoclassical journals, then you will just drive away anyone that could carry a pluralist course.
Yeah, that's true.
So that's what the University of Amsterdam is investing in driving any pluralists away.
Very clear.
The University of Amsterdam has a good tradition in driving pluralists away, but
yes. It's not really becoming a discussion. This,
no,
we were
but
all friends.
No. I think actually the students are to blame here. are the prospective students. And I was listening to Professor Keen's story about how his, and maybe I'm misinterpreting your story, so please fill in later, about how his course in Australia got cancelled at some point, and how he is losing students in the UK because of a different grading system. And that got me thinking, I connected that to both the Rethink report that says that more than that there's a lot of mainstream teaching, it's also that most universities teach the same. And there's a report here in this book that also says the same thing from different people. So that got me thinking, why do high school students apparently prefer to choose similar topics or a similar type of course? Well, maybe they don't. But I think maybe a nice analogy is the position of ice cream stands on the beach. So, right?
Not lemonade sellers?
No, not lemon. I don't dare to do a lemonade analogy here at this panel. So suppose the beach goes from that side of the table to this side of the table. Where would you open your ice cream stand? If you were just one guy, you would just do it in the middle, right? So people who would arrive on the beach have the shortest distance to travel to your stand. Now suppose there's a second ice cream stand opening up. Where would that open up? Well, this is the only suitable place. Because everybody who ends up on the left side of the beach will go to this one. Everybody who ends up on the right side of the beach will go to this one. If you open your ice cream stand over here, you have this area plus half of this area, which is obviously less good than the entire area. So I'm thinking of economics
That's actually
education as them bunching in the middle to attract the maximum number of students.
that implies the students actually know what they're eating, and
No,
they don't.
They arrive at random places on the beach, right?
No, that's hoteling, which of course is about people being distributed along a physical dimension,
Yeah.
and therefore the centre being the only place you should start commercially. So you're actually better to have social divisions. To say if you sit 1/3 and 2/3, you therefore minimise the amount of distance people have to walk to the beach. So it's an argument against allowing the market to choose where the ice cream stalls locate themselves. And that's a perfectly apt example for universities as well, because what happens when you have the type of funding that applies now, where the funding is all on the students, and where students know bugger all about what different universities teach. They are not informed. To have a market, you have to have informed consumers. Okay? School students are not informed consumers of universities. By the time they graduate, they would have experienced one university. Before they got there, they've experienced 0 universities. That's all they know. University is not a place for a market-based system, but that's what the low-grade bureaucrats who put this stuff together, who believe everything should be reduced to a market, are doing. So make it into a market system. Let the students choose. What the hell do they know, frankly? High school students. I'm speaking as an ex-one. I knew bugger all about different universities. I was incredibly lucky. I went to Sydney University because the buildings look better. Okay? That's why I got the most amazing education. I got Ted Wheelwright and Frank Still as my lecturers. I had no idea who they were, except that I had them as teachers. Then I saw what the contrasts were across New South Wales. I'm bloody lucky I got them. I had no damn idea until after I graduated why I was so lucky. So the whole idea that you should marketise education shows that people who design these things as markets don't know the absolute essential to a market is repeat purchase and informed consumers. Neither applies to universities.
So the socially optimum is to tell one university to be here and one university to be here.
The social optimum is to constrain universities being able to exploit the fact that humanities are cheap and STEM subjects are expensive. So when you take the caps off, all the top-ranked universities, which are the ones the students flock to, not because of location but because of status, they all go to the high-status universities, they ignore the low-status ones, and they treat them as uniform institutions. Now, as it happens, when you get to know universities well enough, you know some departments are going to have idiosyncratic individuals in them who are incredibly worthwhile, and you won't know about whether they're worthwhile until so many, many years have passed. For example, there's a total arsehole at the University of Wollongong. He ran over the foot of the union president across a picket line at one stage. He also happens he's a lousy teacher. He happens to be one of the world's leading researchers in evolutionary dynamics. And students who went to that university got really first-hand research into what actually, the fact that evolution has actually got some self-determining elements to it. In other words, it can be accelerated under environmental stress right at the DNA level. Now, that guy, because he's I can give quite a few fresh words to describe his personality, okay? But he's brilliant. He happens to be at a lousy university. Now, if we actually let all go to the top, you get these rich universities that get all the students and all the good ones. The diversity doesn't happen at the lower level. So removing the caps was done on the basis of believing the university is a market system when it's not. And the caps themselves at least force the students to spread more broadly. And that is part of the thing that actually allows heterodox economics to survive, because we get a hide at the lower ranked universities, again, because of the journal issues we're talking about here. So unintentionally, this just at the stage when we're needing heterodox economics and it's getting strong, it's being weakened by the last gasps of neoliberalism that are implying a market system on top of universities which are not markets.
Very clear once again. And I would like to ask, we've just seen Maarten and Francis tell us what the actual curricula in the Netherlands look like on average. There are some differences between universities. Go and download the report and you'll find some. But on average, they're quite monistic, and they're very narrow. I would like to ask, what is the main driver of that, or what are the main drivers of this type of curriculum, apart from, let's say, the publish or perish academic culture tied to the fact that at the moment, almost all the top-ranked journals are neoclassical. What other factors play a large role there in keeping our curriculum the way it is?
Tradition.
Yeah, momentum. Once it's locked in. Remember, at one stage, the classical school dominated. The neoclassicals were the fringe. Okay? That flipped over in about a 5 or 10 year period, back in the 1870s.
And what would be necessary to have and to keep a pluralist curriculum?
Creating new schools of economics.
Yeah.
New schools of economics.
Even more. I think we got plenty of schools of economics. It's
Yeah, but if they're not going to change internally, then there's one alternative.
New faculties. New faculties or new schools of thought?
Both.
Okay. Please elaborate.
Well, just to give, I'm sort of running into the danger to preach for my own community, but at the Utrecht School of Economics has been established in 2003, so that's the youngest department in one of the oldest universities in the Netherlands, and we took the liberty to build a new economics curriculum based on law, social sciences, history and geography, because there have been groups in economic geography, economic history, law and economics and economic sociology for more than a century. And I think we took that seriously and also distinguished ourselves from the other schools of economics. And from scratch, you can really have a sort of revolutionary change in a curriculum. But I think if you have a school running for 100 years or more, it's extremely difficult to change the initial path, so to say.
Okay. And any other thoughts on that? Agreement everywhere.
Yeah.
It seems like a good idea. It's hard to change a culture, so I find it hard to say something really constructive about it. My dream, my ideal would be to have an honest conversation between orthodox and heterodox economists and all the other schools of thought. Just have a university as the Humboldt University was actually designed to be. You take a real life problem and you discuss it from all perspectives. So if you, a starting point, a possible game changer, I hope it's going to be a game changer, might be the diversity committee and the democratization and decentralization committees that brought out reports after the Maagdenhuis occupation. Well, it's a very Amsterdam-based story. Bottom line, students were angry, humanities students. Reports were produced that require universities, that recommend to universities, among other things, to have a to have a diverse curriculum to provide incentives to do that. And if you're starting there, if you're saying, well, what have you done on promoting diversity? How honest have you been in your course? And add this to the assessment structures in place, that could be a starting point where we get more honest discussions. But I saw a question on that.
Okay. Yes, a question?
Yeah.
I think it's funny that you mentioned the... Oi, I'm Isabel, economics student. And I think it's funny that you mentioned the Maagdhuis, because for me, I was doing microeconomics then, and no one of the economics classes were at Maagdhuis. No one cared about the decentralization, about democracy. They don't care. For me, I think it's incredible to see the difference between cultural studies and humanities studies and economics, because they just want to get their paper. They're not critical at all. They don't ask questions. They don't make
So the Homo
notes.
economicus does exist.
Yeah, they do exist. Also, if you look at experiments and stuff, they are less altruistic. That's proven in research.
In that case, change incentives.
Yeah,
If you change incentives,
there should be
this
some
is the
change in
content that will
incentives,
change.
because now they're not critical. They just want to have their papers, mass education, and they are not interested in diverse
If they're really
education.
Homo economicus, we should really change incentives for these guys. They will flip like hell. This is
Well, that's one of the recommendations of the diversity report. One of the reasons that I can't speak for the students, but for the faculty, the Maagdhuis occupation just didn't really chime, because we just went through a reorganization in 2011 in which everyone that was interested in pluralism, was interested in critical thinking, was interested in real world economics, was fired. So the whole history and methodology of economics groups was fired at that point, and those that were still critical and still had a job, they were afraid to speak out. So of course, at the economics faculty, there was just, everyone was scared as hell to be associated with the Maagdhuis occupation. I don't think I'm doing, I think I'm taking a risk here as well. So that is why staff didn't really reply. And yeah, students didn't think that economics could be done in another way, because they'd been brainwashed into thinking there's only one way of doing economics. And as you mentioned, the other faculties, well, the other faculties are much more open to diverse approaches. It's one of the first things you get taught in anthropology or sociology, that there is many ways to look at social lives, and hey, we don't know what's the right way, so we'll show you all of them. And as economists can learn a lot from that. So I think that's the reason that the economic students just didn't care at that point.
I think if I can actually mention one potential way that change can occur, it's actually disillusionment of the very top echelons of the profession. Because you're seeing that happening right now. There's three remarkable papers I recommend you take a look at. One by Kosher Lakota, who was the head of the Minneapolis Fed, called Toy Models. I quoted my paper there. The other by Blanchard has still got a long way to go, but he's now saying, do DSGE models have a future? And calling for a range of approaches when he was the most emphatic person enforcing DSGE methodology a mere 10 years ago. And then Paul Romer's paper, The Trouble with Macroeconomics, which trashes neoclassical economics with a sort of fluidity that I normally am associated with. And he's from, somebody who's actually seen a potential Nobel Prize winner, and he's the World Bank's chief economist. So when you start seeing the high priests despairing, and after a decade when the economy has not behaved the way they thought, that's why they're despairing, then there's some chance coming from that. I think it's what gave Keynes a break in 1936-37. But this time we have to make sure it doesn't break again afterwards.
We have some questions from the audience as well, in the back. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm actually practicing actuary too, except theoretical physics. And I was always surprised that an actuary plays such a large role in insurers or pension funds, while our models, I should say, doesn't really work. So shouldn't be the change in curricula coming from outside I mean, once, okay, it's made a little bold. Once people see that the glass balls we look in are not really predicting our future, then maybe we should change. I mean, should it come from outside instead from inside?
Yeah, I think a lot of it does come from outside, because particularly politicians would have been screaming at economists who told them that 2008 was going to be a fabulous year. Okay, so you are seeing real change coming from that external pressure, and that's why I think these days the main places which are pushing for change in economics aren't the universities, it's the central banks and the treasuries, where people are being forced because they don't want to get stuff which is wrong every time as their theoretical guidance, and it actually matters to people in the public service because they do get their asses kicked for getting it wrong. Economists in the universities can go back and sit on their desks and nobody kicks them behind.
Okay, so tradition is a big stifling factor, but there are hopeful signs, and politicians, policymakers, and angry students sometimes, if they're not too brainwashed, might stand a chance as well. We have some more questions, one over here. Please stand up and take the microphone.
Well, you say politicians would like to have some help from economics as well, but isn't the problem that the current theory is understood by many people and that many people can talk about it? So if you are giving them a pluralistic worldview, that might be very complicated. So can we really help these people without a new paradigm?
That's an extremely good question. I'll let us take the lead. I've answered the last couple. Who wants to go on that one?
When you mean really change, you do need a paradigm shift, I think. But at least this runs right into the main problem of pluralist economics, and it's really hard to discern very good new ideas, very good new ways of looking at the society at the start from really bad ways of looking at the society. I mean, so if you put the lid off, that's a fear some people may have. You put the lid off and all these ideas come out. Why don't we end up implementing or doing exactly the wrong stuff? And what will stop us from implementing the wrong stuff and help us choose to implement the good stuff?
I think we're already doing the wrong stuff, which is a head start. But that's
probably be much
worse. But it's a good point, because you do need a paradigm shift, and it is very hard. There are a lot of cranks in economics. And the question is, where are they? They're not necessarily outside the academia. A lot of them are inside. Like people like Robert Barrow, for example, I definitely call a crank. Anybody who puts that forward as an argument deserves the label of a crank. But you do need a paradigm. I mean, you need something which people can comprehend. That's one reason I've designed Minsky. I didn't have enough time to show you closely what I was doing with those tables there, but it's a capacity to show something like that, show the logic of it, and then say, let's change these details and see what happens, and a politician can actually observe it. Now, this is what's been designed in engineering for a long, long time. Packages like Simulink and so on, which engineers have been using for half a century now to design complex dynamic systems. That sort of thing makes it possible to visually see what's going on to some extent. So it is a large part of actually being able to communicate it as well, and that's where your point is very well taken.
I'm not sure you should strive for one new paradigm. It sounds very much now like we're leaving an old paradigm and making a new paradigm dominant. But the list of questions that you put in your slides are all valid questions. So rather a better way, I think, from a methodological point of view to a philosophical point of view, to look at economics is not through the lens of Kuhnian paradigms, but rather Lakatosian research programs. And those research programs are not like Lakatos envisioned them, that you can decide for one being the most progressive over another, but they have different starting points and they solve different puzzles. So you can, as long as you're clear about this kind of question requires this instruments and this question that instruments, then we don't have to have a total internally consistent paradigm at all. Biologists don't have that. You use different research methods. If you're looking at social biology, if you're sitting in the wild observing gorillas, that's completely different from the microscopic biology at DNA level. So, and both are taught at biology. And we're not saying that biologists need a paradigm change because they're using different methods.
General relativity and quantum mechanics.
Yeah, but
Similar.
those are
Yeah,
natural
sensitive.
sciences and not social sciences. So, I mean...
But they've,
Yeah,
they've,
well,
they've
so-
got more
they're really
diversity than
different
economics.
So in natural sciences, you cannot deal with only one paradigm. In social sciences, the problems are compounded way further. So if you're looking for a paradigm shift, this talk of paradigm shift sounds to me like you're looking to limit all that research to one paradigm, and that would be reductionistic. Reductionism is already bad in the natural sciences. It's a nightmare in the social sciences. So that argument only emphasizes my point, I'd say.
Okay, I think we have time for one last audience question. Yes, over here, sir.
My name is Marcel Elzenaar. I'm here because I develop new programs for secondary schools. And I'm very sorry to hear that these researchers are so suppressed. That you're not free to be true to what you really believe. Because I think a good teacher has his own core values, his own beliefs, and can show them in relation to the rest of the field. Then you're an inspiring teacher. When I think about that, I think then also the students will be suppressed and brainwashed. And they still are kind of institutionalized. They do what they should do to get the exam. Now, I know of some students in some other faculties, and I can mention the faculty or the study that's Future Planet Studies, where they said we get so much theory about the future, about how everything is going wrong, we get depressed. And they decided to develop their own honors program called Future Planet Actions to go do something about it, go do something with the theory. And I would ask the questions if also the form of the education is part of the problem. That you have professors sending knowledge, sending theory, and the students consuming, following, believing. I would ask the question, how much of your curriculum is based on the student being active, researching his or her world about the economic system?
Well, the good news is that I'm still having a very nice job, and this is exactly what I'm doing day to day. So, making students curious about why it is that some regions prosper and some countries are rich and others are poor, and why it is such a miracle that we have such a high welfare in most parts of the world. And also trying to deal with data, and data is always insufficient, especially social science data, but at least it gives you a first hint of what's going on. And also, well, that's my predecessor, we're doing quite a lot of entrepreneurship education, and entrepreneurship education very much is about creating a world and testing your ideas. Of course, with economic principles, don't get me wrong, it's not just anything goes, but at least trying to experiment with what works, what doesn't work, and to act in the real world and in the real market, so to say, which is very much dependent on all kind of biases and heuristics which we know from psychology, which depends on a lot of institutional settings which we know from law, from cultural studies. But I think as an economist you can still make somewhat differently sense of that and also set up experiments that psychologists or sociologists wouldn't do, but still can also make use of them and create new knowledge together with these neighboring disciplines.
Can I have just one more?
Okay, if it's very pressing. Okay. Here's the microphone.
Yeah.
I'm
Stand up, sir.
curious. Hi, Werner. Nice to meet you. Yeah. I'm a psychologist, and I'm very curious about your perspective on the larger world, the real world, in which we all see internationally a pretty authoritarian tendencies within our democracies. And like you already said, that for years now, this neoliberal mindset is infecting the free thinking, how it should be on the university. But what are your future projections in a world where Trump in Holland, the PVV may have more power than they have now already. How will that affect our free thought?
Ooh, actually, I came here to discuss economics. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I think the question is really quite off topic.
Well, I can give it a try.
My book answers that,
if you want.
answers that question to some extent.
Well, I think open and free societies are the exception and not the rule. But on the other hand, we've learned from economic research on long-term prosperity that open, inclusive societies are probably the best recipe for prosperous societies. But you need a lot of investments and debate and efforts to make sure that the institutions enable openness and create enable new combinations and democracy. So it's a hell of a job to create open societies that are also flourishing on the long term. And unfortunately, this is more the exception than the rule, but I think this is a challenge for economists, not something to
run away from. And I think what we've seen with globalization and deregulation, the real sufferers that have been the working class of the West. And they've been ignored by the economists on the basis that they can be compensated by the gainers, but we won't worry about the compensation. The fact that the argument there are gains from trade is extremely tenuous. If you read the work of the Economic Complexity Atlas at Harvard University, or take a look at Danny Roddick's work, the gains from trade simply aren't there. Joe Stiglitz's scepticism about globalisation was quite justified. So when that situation, when the working class of the West has suffered, and the majority of the population, when they lash back at the progressives who ignored them and went for identity politics instead, and the left is being sunk because it left the economics to the textbooks. Okay, and then now you're going down in flames with neoliberal economics and being aligned with progressive social policies.
But in a way, we're here to solve that, right? I mean, what we're doing here is building social capital, and the thing that helps is understanding each other and having this social capital. So, in a way,
it does help to have the conversation, definitely.
Yeah.
But I think we've got to realise the extent to which neoliberal economics has led us into the situation where they've got the rise of the right once more in Europe.
Well,
I think we can. Yeah, sorry.
We're just warming up now.
I know, you're just warming up, and so is the audience. More and more questions, but unfortunately, fortunately, you will be able to ask them, but during drinks. I would like to round off the evening on a high note. As Professor Stam just said, open societies are not for free. Open societies require a lot of work. And so do open universities and open faculties of economics. That much is clear. We've heard there are quite big barriers to that in terms of tradition, in terms of hierarchy, and people doing what they're told instead of questioning what they're told. We've also heard that there are hopeful tendencies, that policymakers are clearly protesting what they've been fed, and that students increasingly, I know from experience from all the people in different countries around the world who are doing the same as we are, students increasingly are also questioning what we're being fed. And I think the open debate in economics faculties is increasing. We can all work towards that, but I think it is. And I would like to thank the panelists of tonight for their big contribution to that. Thank you very much for coming.